Hello and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Gabrielle and I do bookish and lifestyle content here on YouTube, TikTok and Instagram, and I'm also an aspiring author. It has come to my attention that I have not caught you up on the books that I've been reading over the past couple of months, so I thought I would do a collective reading wrap up for September and October. It is also so gloomy outside, it definitely feels like we are right into the winter months now, and I've also had the flu for the past week, so I thought instead of a sit down video we would get cozy, get comfy, grab a drink and chat books. First things first, let's go make a coffee. Okay, let's make this a little bit more cozy. Okay, I'm feeling pretty cozy now. The last thing I want to do is put on my pink lights because that just makes me feel nice and cozy. Perfect. Also, I realise it is winter and I'm still drinking iced coffees, but honestly, you cannot take an iced vanilla latte away from me. Ugh. I have my iPad here because I need to remember what I've been reading over the past 2 months. I am the worst when it comes to remember everything that I've read in a month, so remembering 2 months, extra difficult, but let's get started. The first book that I picked up in September was Of Flame and Fury by Mikayla Bridge. Now, I picked this book up because I was so intrigued by the concept. It was basically sold to me as Formula One but with phoenixes, and the world that is set did give that. We have basically similar to Formula One teams, we've got people that have got different roles within the teams, but instead of cars, we've got phoenixes. And our main character is like a phoenix tamer, but her and her phoenix are scouted to go onto this new team in a different region. And the phoenix racer or rider that is scouted is her worst nemesis. I need to say that this is a YA fantasy, and I do actually quite like a lot of YA fantasies. However, this read very YA for me. I think the main characters in this were about 16, 17, and it really didn't add up that these 16, 17-year-olds were in charge of basically a Formula One team, because as far as I'm aware, it wasn't like a young person's race. But you know what, it is a fantasy world, I would forgive it. There was a little bit of a romance between our main character and her nemesis, but I wouldn't say it's the main plot of the story. It took me a while to get into it. I did think it was a little bit boring sometimes. And my main issue was that although it was kind of set up as this Formula One for phoenixes, it was kind of almost like Mario Kart for phoenixes, because the races seemed to have all these kind of like, I don't know, like booby traps, obstacles that were a bit like outlandish. There was a lot of foreshadowing in this for the finale, and there's actually part of it that I was quite impressed with in terms of the ending. However, I just think because I wasn't really invested in the characters, I didn't really relate. I was finding it a little bit far-fetched based on what age they were. I didn't love it as much as I really wanted to love it. But the cover is stunning, and also I got the Sprayed Edges edition, so that was also a factor in me buying this book. But overall, if you actually love YA fantasies with a romance subplot, you might get on with this. The next book I read in September was The Sea Witch, which was mine and my best friend's Unhinged pick of the month. If you don't know, me and my best friend pick an unhinged read for every month because that is the theme of our little book club that we do together. And this came up in one of our searches for unhinged reads. And it's basically a Little Mermaid retelling, however it's in the version that the villain gets the girl. Now, I've read quite a few Little Mermaid retellings at this point, and honestly I really did enjoy this. I thought the characters were quite funny, especially the Sea Witch, which was essentially the male version of Ursula, and he did have tentacles, which was kind of the unhinged aspect, although I feel like we could have got even more unhinged with this. And I did have a good time. I really did. I binged it. What else can I say? It was good fun. It was, I think because it was a retelling, it was a very easy read. You kind of understood what was happening. But just not as unhinged as I was hoping. Next I picked up Chokehold, which is a book co-written by Lee Rivers and Harley Beck. Now, if you know me, you know that I'm absolutely obsessed with everything that Lee Rivers does. And this was my final book on her backlist. I literally have no more books from her to read now, which is so sad. But this was an dark romance, and boy, what a wild ride. This was 100% more unhinged than Sea Witch. Our two main characters are basically stepbrothers, not related, but their parents are married. There's masks involved. It was very, very fun. There was a lot of dark themes throughout, so definitely check your trigger warnings. But the one thing I really loved about this book, that the fact that when they were in a relationship, they were not like secretive about it. Whereas a lot of the other romances that I've read where they're not out at the start, it's a lot of like secretive, we're keeping it on the DL. But this one was more like, okay, I've discovered this about myself and I'm okay with it and I'm happy to tell people about it. So I thought that was really refreshing. Despite the fact that they were stepbrothers and it was taboo. It was a very fun read, and honestly I cannot wait a single second for Lee Rivers to bring out another book. Please, give it to me. Then I picked up Wildcard by Elsie Silver. This was a new release for September, and I actually went on the hunt to get the physical copy a little bit early because my local Waterstones usually does have these kind of books almost a day, or I've even seen it like a week early. Sometimes I go into my local Waterstones and I'm like, what? That doesn't come out for like another week. But alas, the one time I actually wanted the book early, I couldn't get it. So I ended up reading it on my Kindle, as I did for quite a lot of these reads. But this was an ex-boyfriend's dad romance, and it was part of the Rose Hill series, so we knew that all of the MMCs were going to be dads. Overall, it wasn't my favourite one out of the entire series, although I did love the maturity of the characters in this. Despite there being a bit of an age gap, I felt that FMC was still very sure of herself, very mature in how she behaved, which was very refreshing for this kind of romance. You usually find in age gap romances there's a maturity difference between the two, but I felt like despite the age gap, our FMC was still really mature. Although I think I'm just too used to dark taboo romances now that I was expecting it to be a little bit more crazy with the fact that it was the ex-boyfriend's dad. But it did follow the formula of a typical Elsie Silver book. I really can't complain. I love Elsie Silver. I love her books. I will read anything that she comes out with, and it was a very easy read. And because I was expecting a lot more from an ex-boyfriend's dad romance, and when I say more, I was just expecting a little bit more taboo, I decided to pick up Birthday Girl by Penelope Douglas. This is a very controversial book online. The age gap is quite an intense age gap, and our FMC is quite young, and she's also actively with her boyfriend at the time of meeting her boyfriend's dad. But honestly, I really enjoyed the tension. The FMC was a little bit annoying at times, but the tension in this just made up for it. I'm actually quite new to reading Penelope Douglas's books. I read Credence not long ago, and this was my second one that I picked up. I didn't love Credence. I didn't love this one either, but I had a lot more fun with this one than I did with Credence. But this one I definitely had fun with. I did really love the MMC. He was absolutely besotted. Even before he could have her, he was besotted with her. And I genuinely just love it when the guy is absolutely simping over the girl. Next I picked up a romance that I've been seeing everywhere at the time, which was In the Veins of the Drowning. And I don't know if I'm just having a hard time with really popular BookTok books, but I wasn't as obsessed with it as I really wanted to be. It is a siren romantasy. However, the sirens in this have wings. I am educated now and I understand that sirens did have wings in original stories. However, before going into this, I did not know that, and I was literally wondering the entire time why they had wings. Did they use the wings? Because for the entire book, this is not a spoiler for the story or anything, but They did not use, not a single siren used their wings for this entire story. They just seemed to be about. In spite of the whole wing situation, the actual story and the romance, I wasn't really feeling. I felt a lot of the plot was a lot of travelling. We seemed to be travelling on a boat and then travelling again to somewhere else. I also found the ending was a little bit underwhelming. Honestly, because I read this in September and I've kind of pushed it to the back of my mind, that I can't really remember what happened. Do I think that I'll pick up the next book because it ended on a cliffhanger? But I don't think it would be like an immediate pick up as soon as it's released. Then I picked up Corrupt, which is the first book in the Devil's Night series by Penelope Douglas. And this book featured one of my favourite things ever, flashbacks. I really love when a book has flashbacks and it goes from the past to the present and you slowly find out what happened in the past to make the present happen. That is one of my absolute favourite styles of books. Our Men of the Devil's Night, which were masked men that did things the night before Halloween, like pranks and things. I mean, that's a little bit cringe already. They were plotting their revenge against the FMC because she did something in the past that messed up their lives. And once we went through all of that and we found out what she did and what they were doing to get their revenge, I just felt that what she did, or what happened at the time, did not constitute what they were doing to her in the present. I felt like the revenge was so cruel. I understand it's a dark romance. However, if it was me, and I forgive quite a lot within a dark romance, if it was me, what they did and what the MMC, who was one of them, did to her, I don't think I could forgive him or them. In fact, I know I couldn't. In fact, even though it's a dark romance, and even though I have seen some messed up stuff happen in dark romances, I don't think I just didn't roll. I didn't roll with what they did. A lot of people say that the first book is not the best book in this entire series, so I am tempted to continue with the series to see how I feel. They are all standalone series, so they're following different couples every time. So maybe I will get along with a different couple. But this first one, no, not for me. Not for me at all. And now we're on to October. Now I started this one in September, so it kind of ran over September, October time. And this again is another dark romance. I'm really in my dark romance era. However, I do believe that this one is very beginner friendly for a dark romance. The themes were not that heavy. It was more the spice that was a little bit dark. Basically, our MMC hunts the FMC through the woods, if you couldn't tell by the cover. And honestly, this was a very fun read. I really liked our two main characters, particularly the MMC. I felt like he was, despite what he was into, he was very like down to earth. He was also a millionaire, so it's kind of almost like a millionaire romance as well. I read in the acknowledgements that this was adapted from a novella, and thinking back on the book, I can definitely see what elements could have been added, particularly the extra characters that we got in this book. I think opens up this to become a little bit of a standalone series. But I think this book was very fun, very easy to read, very good for beginner dark romance readers. So if you're just getting into dark romance, this might be a very good one to start off with. Then we've got our next Unhinged read of the month, and I'd seen this one about. It is literally called Unhinged, and it is a novella. I think it was just about 80 pages. But tell me how we got a romance with a sentient door, yes, you heard me right, plus a whole true crime subplot. Tell me how we got that all in about 80 pages. It was definitely unhinged, I will give it that, but I think I completely draw the line at romances with inanimate objects. I just physically can't believe that I read this book, and it was definitely unhinged. For the rest of the books of October, I used a spinning wheel to choose all of my reads. I did a full YouTube video on it, which I will link. But the first pick by the spinning wheel was Phantasma by Kalie Smith. This is one that I have been holding off on reading. basically since last year because I thought it would be excellent for spooky season. And it definitely was. It gave good spooky season vibes. It was essentially like a haunted house / deadly games, trials, ghosts and devils. So pretty much perfect for this time of year. However, I did spend a lot of time comparing it to Caraval. I had heard that it gave similar vibes to Caraval, but just more like an adult, darker fantasy romance, which it definitely was darker. It definitely was more adult. However, I felt the plot was very reminiscent of Caraval. There was obviously some real differences, but the actual base structure of there being this kind of game that we are going to be putting ourselves in. We have a sister who's put herself into this game, and our FMC is trying to get her sister out. Meanwhile, she meets someone that's going to help her through the games. So that base plot, very similar to Caraval. If you do love Caraval, I think you will like this, especially if you like darker fantasy romances. However, in spite of the fact that it was very similar to Caraval, the plot was a little bit predictable. I could see what was going to happen from pretty early on in the book. And there are times when that's really satisfying, like you're almost like proved right. But I was expecting just something a little bit more, which I never got. But overall, it was a fun read. It was definitely apt for spooky season, and I've heard that the second book is a lot better. So I'm tempted to pick that up in the near future. Then I picked up Mate by Allie Hazelwood. This was a new release for October. And I really loved Bride, but dare I say I loved Mate even more. I genuinely think it might be my favourite book that I read in October. This one was a lot more involved in the whole werewolf society and the whole political structure within that. If you've read Bride, you'll know what this book was about, and the title kind of gave it away. But I had so much fun. I really loved it. I love the dynamic between the two main characters. Allie Hazelwood has such a talent at making all of her characters really relatable, really lovable and fun. And you connect with them like almost straight away. They're really down to earth even though they are mystical creatures like werewolves. The spice was also really fun. I really have no complaints about this book at all. And I will read any other books within this universe. The next book I picked up was another one off my physical TBR, chick. And this is Wolf by Paisley Hope. And this is the first book in the Soldiers of Bedlam series, which is a Motorcycle Club standalone series. And let me just say, if you love Sons of Anarchy, you will love this book. It literally felt like watching Sons of Anarchy. The male main character basically was a dark-haired Jax Teller. The romance was borderline insta-lovey, almost obsession at first sight, which I chose to ignore because I was just having such a great time. It almost made me restart Sons of Anarchy again. I think I've watched that show twice all the way through, and I was nearly rewatching it again. Please bear this in mind, this is a dark romance, different from Paisley Hope's other series, which is the Silver Pine series, which are cowboy romances. This one definitely had darker themes in it. If you love Sons of Anarchy, I definitely recommend this book. Then I picked up another novella, which was Hot for Slayer by Allie Hazelwood. This was part of a collection of paranormal romances that were released by Amazon, which were written by different authors. They did this last year as well for Christmas time, and the only one I really liked last year was Allie Hazelwood's one, so I decided just to pick up hers, because honestly, she actually can do no wrong, even if it's within 100 pages. And even though it was under 100 pages, I really felt like it had a lot of depth. Same as Mate, same as any of her other books, you are immediately connected to the characters within her stories. So this story was between a vampire and a vampire hunter, and he had been hunting her for centuries, and she's always just missed him. But in this book, he does something very unexpected. I won't go into any spoilers. I thought this was a perfect palette cleanser for spooky season, and even though it's past spooky season, if in general you like a little vampire romance, I genuinely think you should pick this up. It is a perfect little novella. Sometimes I read novellas and I wish that they were even longer. However, this one was perfectly compacted to within the 100 pages, and I'm very happy with everything that we got within that. I then picked up Darkbirch Academy, which was an arc that I had been sent quite a few months ago now. It is actually released at this point. However, I didn't love it. I found it really hard to give negative reviews. However, I feel like reading is so subjective that some people will really love a book and some people will not like a book. And for me, I just didn't like this book. I went into a lot more detailed review in my Spinning Wheel reading vlog. However, my main qualms were that I thought the FMC was pretty inconsistent in her personality. I was very confused on the time period that we were in. A lot of the technology and everything didn't really make sense to me. I feel like getting to know the MMC could have been a lot more suspenseful. There was a lot of things that were really interesting about him, but I feel like we were just told them immediately instead of slowly finding out, which I think could have made a really big difference in the story. And finally, with the plot, I feel like we just could have had a lot more of a build-up, a lot more suspense with a lot of plot points. I feel like the world building and the story had a lot more potential, and again, I don't know if it's just because it's the first in a series. I always feel like a first in a series is never as good as the rest of the series. But based on the first book, I don't think I will be continuing on with the series. And finally, the last book that we read in October was The Darkest Descending by Chloe C. Peneranda. And this was another one that I was very kindly sent an arc for. It doesn't come out until I think the end of November or early December. And it is the final book in the Nightfall trilogy. The first book being The Stars Are Dying. And this was one of the first fantasy romance books that I read when I started reading fantasy. I think I read it almost straight after reading and finishing ACOTAR, which was over 2 years ago now. And when I read it, it was indie published. And now the series is being traditionally published, which is why I have waited so long to eventually get the final instalment, which is totally okay. I love that for her. But even though there's been a biggish gap between all of the reads, one thing I think that Chloe is so good at is giving us little catch-up sentences, which I feel a lot of series don't do. But I think she's been really mindful of the fact that there maybe has been a gap between reading all of the different books. So there's 3 books in total. I read the second one in January of this year, so already there's about a 9-month difference. I know a lot of people do reread books to prepare for the next book in a series, but I am personally not one of these people. So I really appreciated all of the sentences throughout the book, because I was reading something, I'm like, oh, who's that? And then we got like a little catch-up sentence and I was like, oh yes, I remember what happened now. It was giving you a catch-up without it being a whole monologue, which I thought was very handy. There was a point at around 70% where I wasn't sure how we were going to wrap up, but we definitely got there. I was very happy with the conclusion, and generally I'm really going to miss the utter love and devotion between Knight and Estrella. Their whole relationship and dynamic was just so beautiful to watch. Although it did become apparent to me that while I was reading this book, there was a lot of mentions of this other world. And I know Chloe had another series as well, which I've now found out that they were interconnected. So I am tempted to pick up that other series just to see how they connect. But overall, I love the entire trilogy and it'll definitely go up there with one of my faves. And I'm also incredibly grateful that I was given an arc to read it early. So that is everything that I read in September and October. Please let me know any books that you have read in the past couple of months that have really stood out to you. If you like this video, please like, subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.